The sea was too calm for war. Commander Nathaniel Ross stood on the bridge of the USS Valiant, hands clasped behind his back, eyes fixed on a horizon that looked almost painted, flat blue water, thin clouds stretched like faded smoke, and a rising sun that turned the ocean into polished copper. Around him, his fleet cut through the Pacific in steady formation. 8 destroyers, 2 cruisers, a supply ship trailing like a quiet servant. The radios hummed with routine chatter, engines droned with reassuring rhythm. Nothing about that morning suggested history would remember it as the day a fleet died in 6 minutes. Ross had been in the Navy 22 years. He had seen storms split ships like matchsticks and had watched men disappear into black water without a sound. He was known for patience, for precision, for the quiet confidence that made young officers trust him even before he spoke. Yet something tugged at him that morning, a sensation like standing on a cliff in fog, knowing the ground might end a step sooner than expected. "Radar is clear," reported Lieutenant Hale, barely 24, his voice eager. "No contacts within 80 miles. Ross nodded, though his eyes remained on the sea. Intelligence had warned of enemy aircraft carriers operating somewhere beyond the islands to the west, but days had passed without a single sign. Convoys had moved safely. Patrols had returned empty. The men had begun to relax. He turned toward the communications officer. "Signal the fleet, maintain tight formation, increase anti-air readiness to condition 2. The officer hesitated. "Sir, no threats detected." Ross's jaw tightened slightly. "Just do it." A minute later, alarms rang briefly across the ships as crews moved to stations, gunners checking belts of ammunition, radar operators leaning closer to glowing screens. Sailors grumbled good-naturedly, assuming the commander was simply being cautious again. The first warning came not from radar, but from the sky itself. A faint buzzing grew on the horizon, almost mistaken for wind. Hale frowned, adjusting his headset. "Sir, picking up something intermittent." Ross stepped beside him. "Range, hard to tell. Signals are scattered." Then someone shouted from the lookout tower. "Aircraft, multiple contacts, bearing 270. Ross grabbed binoculars. At first he saw nothing but shimmering air. Then tiny specks emerged from the sunlight, descending rapidly, growing larger with terrifying speed. Dozens of them, dive bombers, wings angled like knives. "General quarters," Ross ordered, his voice steady but loud enough to cut through every other sound. Sirens wailed across the fleet, men sprinted to guns, engines roared as ships attempted evasive maneuvers. The sky filled with streaks of black smoke from anti-aircraft fire. Explosions bloomed like dark flowers. One bomber spiraled downward in flames, crashing into the sea. Cheers erupted briefly, then died as more aircraft appeared behind it, dozens more, their formation tight and relentless. Ross watched as the first bomb struck the cruiser Resolute. The explosion lifted the ship's bow out of the water, sending a column of fire into the sky. A second blast followed instantly, ripping open her deck. Through his binoculars he saw men thrown into the air like rag dolls. "Signal evasive pattern Delta," he shouted. Destroyers scattered, zigzagging wildly. Guns rattled nonstop. Shell casings piled at sailors' feet, but the attackers were precise, trained to strike fast and vanish before counterfire could organize. A torpedo bomber skimmed low over the waves, releasing its payload toward the destroyer Grant. Ross held his breath. The torpedo struck midship. A plume of water and steel erupted. The Grant split apart within seconds, her stern rising unnaturally before sliding beneath the surface. The clock on the bridge ticked past the first minute. Chaos grew thicker than smoke. Radio channels overlapped with desperate calls, damage reports, requests for medical teams, warnings of incoming aircraft. Ross forced himself to listen, to filter information, to give clear orders. Valiant, hard starboard. All guns focus on incoming from port side. Cruiser Hamilton, cover the supply ship. Another explosion rocked the water nearby, showering the bridge with salt spray and shrapnel fragments that rattled like hail. Hale's hands trembled on the radar console. Sir, they're everywhere. Ross felt an ache behind his ribs, not fear exactly, but the crushing awareness that the fleet was outmatched. These planes had come from multiple directions, their coordination flawless. Someone had known their route. Someone had waited for the perfect moment. In the second minute, the supply ship Aurora took 2 direct hits. Flames spread across her deck, igniting fuel stores. The blast that followed sent a rolling fireball across the ocean, forcing nearby destroyers to veer away or be consumed. Smoke rose in a towering column that darkened the sun. Ross issued orders with mechanical calm. All ships scatter. Independent maneuvering, priority, survival. But survival was already slipping away. A bomb pierced the Valiant's forward turret, detonating below deck. The ship shuddered violently. Lights flickered. The smell of burning metal filled the air. Damage control teams rushed forward while Ross steadied himself against the railing. "Report," he demanded. "Forward guns disabled," came the reply. "Casualties heavy." He swallowed hard. The Valiant was his flagship, the heart of the formation. Without her coordination systems, communication across the fleet became fragmented. Each captain fought alone against an enemy that seemed endless. Minute 3 began with a roar that drowned out everything else. 3 dive bombers targeted the cruiser Hamilton simultaneously. Bombs struck her engine room, then her ammunition storage. The resulting explosion split the ship open from keel to mast. A shockwave rolled across the water, knocking sailors off their feet on nearby vessels. Ross lowered his binoculars slowly. He knew many men aboard the Hamilton. He had eaten with them just days earlier, shared stories, laughed at small jokes that seemed distant now. "Commander," Hale whispered, "we're losing them." Ross nodded once. "Keep transmitting coordinates to all ships. Tell them to head east at maximum speed. Break through while they can." A torpedo slammed into the destroyer Pierce, sending it spinning. Another destroyer collided with debris while attempting to avoid bombs, its hull torn open. Fires spread everywhere, turning the ocean into a patchwork of burning oil and shattered steel. Minute 4 felt longer than the rest combined. The sky buzzed with aircraft diving and climbing in relentless cycles. Anti-air fire claimed several more attackers, but for every one that fell, another seemed to appear. Ross watched as one of his last intact destroyers managed to shoot down 2 planes in quick succession, only to be struck moments later by a bomb that detonated its depth charges, creating a massive underwater explosion that swallowed the vessel whole. The Valiant itself took another hit near the stern. Engines sputtered, speed dropped dramatically, smoke poured from broken vents. Ross realized they were becoming a stationary target. "Abandon formation," he ordered again. "All surviving ships retreat immediately." The communications officer hesitated, tears streaking his face. "Sir, there are only 3 ships still responding." Ross closed his eyes for half a second, then reopened them. "Then save those 3. Minute 5 arrived with eerie clarity. The initial shock had faded, replaced by a cold, precise focus. Ross moved from station to station, checking on his crew, giving quiet words of encouragement. He felt strangely detached, as if watching events through glass. The ocean was no longer calm. It boiled with wreckage and fire, dotted with men clinging to life rafts or floating debris. Formation of bombers lined up directly above the Valiant. Ross knew what was coming. All hands brace for impact. Bombs fell like dark raindrops. 2 missed, exploding in towering columns of water. One struck the main deck, ripping open a massive hole. Another detonated near the bridge, shattering windows and throwing Ross to the floor. His ears rang. Dust and smoke filled the air. When he forced himself up, half the bridge crew lay injured. Hale struggled to stand, blood trickling from his forehead. "Sir, engines are gone. We're dead in the water." Ross nodded slowly. "Signal abandon ship." The words felt heavier than any command he had ever given. Minute 6 began as sailors prepared lifeboats under relentless fire. Some helped wounded comrades. Others continued firing guns even as flames surrounded them. Ross remained on the bridge, ensuring evacuation proceeded in order. He watched as the last surviving destroyer on his radar screen faded, its signal replaced by static. One final wave of aircraft descended. Machine gun fire swept across the deck. Lifeboats launched amid chaos. Ross grabbed a megaphone, shouting instructions until his voice grew hoarse. "Move, stay together, get clear of the ship." A massive explosion erupted below deck, ammunition igniting from spreading fires. The Valiant began to list heavily to port. Water rushed over the rails. "Commander," Hale urged, "we have to go." Ross took one last look at the burning sea, at the shattered remnants of the fleet he had commanded only minutes earlier. 8 ships gone, hundreds of men lost. The horizon still glowed with that same deceptive calm. He stepped into a lifeboat just as the Valiant's bow dipped beneath the waves. The ship groaned like a wounded animal, then slipped into the ocean with terrifying speed, pulling debris and water into a swirling vortex. Silence followed, broken only by distant crackles of fire and the hum of departing aircraft. The attack had lasted 6 minutes. Ross drifted among survivors for hours before rescue planes arrived. He moved from raft to raft, checking injuries, offering quiet words, holding hands of men too shocked to speak. He memorized faces, those who lived and those who did not. Days later, in a makeshift hospital tent on a distant island, he sat before a board of inquiry. Admirals asked questions with grave expressions. Could he have anticipated the attack? Should the fleet have taken a different route? Why had radar not detected the aircraft sooner? Ross answered honestly. Intelligence had been incomplete. Weather conditions had masked radar signatures. Enemy coordination had been exceptional. Yet none of those explanations eased the weight pressing on his chest. At night, he replayed every second in his mind, the moment he ordered increased readiness, the first glimpse of aircraft, the instant he realized the battle was unwinnable. He wondered if earlier caution might have saved more lives. He wrote letters to families, each one personal, each one acknowledging the bravery he had witnessed. News of the battle spread quickly. Newspapers called it a tragedy, a devastating ambush. Some criticized naval leadership. Others praised the courage of the sailors who fought against overwhelming odds. Ross avoided reporters, focusing instead on helping survivors recover. Weeks later, a young seaman approached him during rehabilitation exercises. "Sir," the man said quietly, "you stayed with us. You didn't run, that mattered." Ross didn't know how to respond. He simply nodded. Months passed. Investigations concluded that enemy reconnaissance had tracked the fleet for days, waiting until aircraft carriers could launch a perfectly timed strike. New defensive protocols were implemented across the Navy, improved radar coordination, tighter convoy formations, constant aerial patrols. Lessons learned from 6 minutes of destruction would shape naval strategy for years. Ross eventually returned to duty, though never again commanding a large fleet. He trained younger officers instead, teaching them about vigilance, humility, and the thin line between routine and catastrophe. He spoke about the importance of trusting instinct, of preparing for threats even when skies seemed empty. He never forgot the sound of sirens that morning or the sight of ships disappearing beneath calm water. Yet he also remembered the bravery, the gun crews who kept firing despite certain death, the medics who carried wounded men through flames, the sailors who helped others into lifeboats before saving themselves. Years later, standing on another quiet shore at sunset, Ross watched waves roll gently onto sand. The ocean looked peaceful again, almost innocent. A young officer beside him asked about the battle, about how it felt to watch an entire fleet vanish so quickly. Ross considered the question for a long moment. War, he finally said, is measured in minutes more often than years. 6 minutes can take everything, but they can also show you who people truly are. He paused, eyes on the horizon where sky met water in a thin, endless line. Those men didn't die in chaos. They fought with honor, and the lessons we learned saved countless others later. That's the only way I can carry it. The officer nodded, silent. As darkness fell, Ross felt the familiar ache of memory, but also a quiet pride. The fleet had died in 6 minutes, but the courage shown in those minutes had echoed far beyond them, shaping futures he would never fully see. The sea continued its endless motion, indifferent to loss, reflecting stars as they appeared one by one. And somewhere beneath those waters lay the ships he once commanded, resting together in silent formation, reminders of a morning when calm skies turned deadly and a commander watched his fleet disappear faster than anyone believed possible, yet still found a way to lead, to endure, and to honor every life that had sailed under his watch.